The review board met on a Thursday. That detail stuck with me, after. A Thursday. As if the thing they were about to do was just another item on a rotation schedule. Another name in a queue. Another file flagged for reclassification. Nothing worth marking on any calendar that mattered. I was 16. I had been at Dreneth for 4 months. The summons came through the standard channel, printed on standard weight documentation paper, stamped with the Academic Compliance and Resource Allocation Directorate's seal, a department so structurally unmemorable that most cadets had never heard its full name and never needed to. The notice informed me that a review of my intake classification had been initiated, that attendance was mandatory, and that I was to bring no materials, no personal items, and no documentation of my own. I brought a pencil. Nobody stopped me. The chamber was 3 levels below the main instruction floors, which I hadn't known existed. A long, rectangular room, low-ceilinged, walls the pale silver gray of the administrative block. No holograms, no assessment terminals. Just a table on a raised platform and 5 chairs behind it, and a single chair on my side facing up toward them. The kind of room designed to make you aware of where you were sitting relative to the people asking the questions. I sat down, crossed my ankles, waited. The board was chaired by a Keth Sorvani administrator I'd never seen before. Assessor Pren, the documentation called him, though he didn't introduce himself. Secondary bilateral jaw lattice, the kind that resonates at frequencies below standard Dreneth hearing range. He had 2 juniors on his left and 2 more on his right. A mixed panel of Kel Sorvani and Velketh species, ridge crests and gill filaments both present, which meant the panel had breadth of competency across physical, cognitive, and behavioral evaluation disciplines. Someone had put thought into the composition. I noted that. Then I stopped thinking about the panel composition and waited for them to open my file. Pren began with my physical conditioning index. This was the reclassification flag. That was why the board existed. My intake physical had returned scores that the classification system's normative tier had failed to process cleanly. And when a score doesn't process cleanly, the system assumes instrument error, reroutes to human review, and the human review assumes the score is inflated. The corrective action is reclassification to a lower tier. The logic was institutional. It ran without malice and arrived at incorrect conclusions with perfect efficiency. Pren read the index number from the file. Then he read the normative ceiling for my age cohort. He stopped. The junior to his far left made a quiet notation. Pren read the number again, which told me he'd expected the file to be wrong and was finding that it wasn't. "We'll move to the environmental tolerance assessment," he said. He read that index. Same result. The ceiling for my cohort sat at 1 figure. My assessed score sat at a different figure. The gap between them was not small. The junior to his far right stopped making notes. I watched his gill filaments go still, which is what Velketh gill filaments do when the mind running them has encountered something it needs undivided processing resources to handle. I had learned that in my 3rd week at Dreneth from a xenophysiology cross-reference text I'd pulled off the supplemental library shelf because I had an hour free and nothing else to read. I had also learned, from the same text, that Velketh gill filaments in a professional context almost never go fully still. Mild agitation, yes. Partial suppression under formal social constraint, yes. Full stillness meant the formal social constraint had stopped working. I made a note of that too, inside, where notes are free. Pren moved to the tactical instinct battery. This one I remembered sitting. A sequenced decision simulation, 48 scenarios, compound variables, time-pressured response windows, designed to assess aptitude for resource prioritization under novel crisis conditions. The Dreneth standard for my intake tier was a completion rate of 62%, with an average response latency of 4.1 seconds per node. The proctor who'd administered it had been Vel Sorvani, senior stripe, the kind of examiner who watches the subject's hands the whole time and says nothing, and he had said nothing through all 48 scenarios, and when the instrument filed its result, he had looked at the output for a long time before he looked at me, and I had looked back, and then he had printed the record and told me I was dismissed. I hadn't thought about that look until just now, sitting in this room. It was the same look Pren was building toward. My file listed a 97% completion rate. Average response latency, 1.3 seconds. Pren set the file down. He didn't slam it. He set it down the way you set something down, when you need your hands free to think. He didn't say anything for a moment. The junior on his near left had stopped writing entirely. The two Kelsorvani members of the panel were looking at each other in the way alien species look at each other when they are communicating through a channel the room's translation rig isn't calibrated to pick up. These were all taken during standard intake assessment windows? Pren asked. Yes, I said. Under standard Proctor observation. Yes. He picked the file back up. He went to the Threat Pattern Recognition Index, the last major assessment category, the one most commonly flagged as inflated for human cadets, because the instrument used for it was calibrated to Vel-Sorvani baseline neural architecture, and human neural architecture produces results the instrument's scoring rubric wasn't designed to accommodate. Pren knew this. The notation at the bottom of that section of my file said as much. Result, non-standard. Rubric, accommodation applied. Score estimated. He read the estimated score anyway. The junior to his far left put her stylus down on the table. I watched Pren's jaw lattice do something I hadn't seen a Keth-Sorvani administrator's jaw lattice do before. A lateral resonance shift. Barely visible, more a change in the air quality around his face than a movement you could track. That indicated, according to the same xenophysiology text, involuntary recalibration of a previously held assessment. The body's way of rewriting what it thought it already knew. He closed the file. For 7 seconds, nobody spoke. I counted. 7 seconds of silence in an institutional review chamber is a long time. It means the board came in with a conclusion, and the evidence in front of them is doing something the conclusion can't accommodate. Cadet Morrow, Pren said finally, you were flagged for this review due to suspected intake assessment error. The standard corrective procedure is reclassification to non-combatant track, followed by reassignment to auxiliary curriculum. I know, I said. That procedure, he said, requires a documented basis in the review record. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The documented basis would have to explain why 4 separate assessment indices, each taken by a different proctor on a different day, each processed by a different instrument, all returned the same category of result. That explanation didn't exist in the language the reclassification procedure ran on. Is there anything you'd like to add to the record? He asked. I thought about it. I thought about the relay station I'd grown up on, Kepler Station 9, Outer Transit Corridor, 2-day round trip from the nearest supply run, when the weather windows cooperated, which they did roughly half the time. I thought about my father running emergency drills with me at age 7, because the nearest medical facility was 43 hours away, and someone needed to know how to set a bone and pack a wound, and calculate fuel reserves on a failing secondary thruster. I thought about the 8 years of that before I sat my academy entrance assessment, and the way the intake evaluator had looked at my scores the same way Pren was looking at my file now. I didn't say any of that. No, I said. Pren looked at me for a long moment. His jaw lattice ran a second resonance shift, quieter than the first. He picked up the review form. He held it for a moment. Then he set it back down in the closed file position. The review is concluded, he said. Your classification stands. The two Kelsorvani board members glanced at each other again. The junior with the still gill filaments made a single notation at the bottom of his pad. One word, which I couldn't read from my side of the room. I stood up, pushed the chair back, picked up my pencil from the edge of the table, where I'd set it when I sat down. Which hallway takes me back to the training floor? I asked. Pren pointed. Left-hand corridor. Second bank of lifts. I nodded, walked to the door, pushed it open. Behind me, I heard the board begin talking among themselves in the low, below-range register that the translation rig doesn't catch. I don't know what they said. I know what they didn't do. They didn't file the reclassification. The training floor was on level 7. I took the stairs.